In May 2023, 18 people died on Everest, more than in any other season in history. Among them was a Hungarian teacher who climbed without oxygen and stopped 50 meters from the summit, and a Canadian anesthesiologist whose 4 guides spent the entire day bringing him down while a helicopter waited below. One paid the minimum for his expedition. The other paid the maximum. Neither came back. Everest in 2026 is a marketplace where the same summit costs anywhere from $35,000 to $200,000. The difference in price is enormous. The difference in outcome is not always. Let's start from the very beginning. 5 in the morning. Everest Base Camp, 5,364 meters. At one end of camp, a climber wakes up inside a heated geodesic dome, a bed with an electric blanket, a hot shower behind a partition, Wi-Fi, a desk, a barista serving morning espresso. His gear has already been packed by Sherpas, the route planned by a personal guide, and oxygen bottles are waiting at every camp all the way to the summit. He paid $200,000 for this expedition. At the other end of camp, a kilometer and a half across the glacier, another climber wakes up. Thin nylon tent walls, a sleeping bag, a thermos of water melted from snow. Gear, partly from eBay, partly bought on credit. 5 oxygen bottles for the entire route. No personal guide, no doctor, no weather team. If something goes wrong, his evacuation plan is the hope that someone nearby will be able to help. His expedition costs $35,000. They are heading for the same mountain, along the same route, through the same camps, the same fixed ropes, and the same death zone. Both paid the same permit fee, $15,000. That is just the entry ticket. Everything else depends on how much more you can pay on top. Everest in 2026 is 3 different worlds beneath one summit. A budget tier at $35,000 to $45,000, a mid-range at $45,000 to $75,000, and a premium tier at $80,000 to $200,000. Every spring, hundreds of people buy the same chance, but in vastly different configurations. And the question here is not who will climb more comfortably. The question is what exactly those dollars buy, and what it costs when the mountain starts to kill. To even attempt Everest, buying a permit is not enough. You need a high-altitude suit, double boots, crampons, oxygen, a mask, a regulator, Sherpas, camps, communications, weather forecasts, insurance, and an evacuation plan. Everyone has all of this, but in different quantities, different quality, and with different margins of safety. On Everest, the difference between a $35,000 expedition and a $200,000 one is not just comfort. It is the amount of oxygen, the number of people around you, and the number of mistakes the mountain will forgive. Now, let's break down what actually makes Everest dangerous. The dangerous conditions begin at 8,000 meters. Climbers call this threshold the death zone, not for drama, but because above it, the human body is literally dying. Oxygen in the air is 1/3 of what it is at sea level. Every breath delivers so little that organs begin to fail. Not eventually, but by the hour. At altitude, the body starts to malfunction. First comes the headache, then loss of coordination, confusion, hallucinations. A person stops understanding where they are and makes decisions that at sea level would seem absurd. This is called high-altitude cerebral edema, HACE. At the same time, breathing fails. Blood vessels cannot withstand the pressure at altitude, and the lungs stop functioning properly. A person suffocates even when surrounded by clean air and a working oxygen bottle. This is high-altitude pulmonary edema, HAPE. Both processes develop within hours, and without immediate descent, they end the same way. The oxygen math is brutal. One bottle at standard flow lasts roughly 6 hours. A summit push and return takes 15 to 21 hours. But there is a detail rarely discussed. If the supply is cut off, the bottle runs out, the regulator freezes, the mask comes loose, the body does not return to its accustomed state. It collapses into a condition it was never adapted to. The entire ascent, it was breathing an artificial mixture. Without it, collapse within minutes. And that is just what happens inside the body. Outside, there are threats of a different kind. Wind on the Everest ridge reaches 160 kilometers per hour. Temperatures drop to -25, -40. In such wind, exposed skin suffers frostbite in 1 to 5 minutes. Weather on Everest changes within hours. A clear morning can end in a storm where visibility drops to zero. Add to that avalanches on the Khumbu icefall, collapsing seracs, falls on ice walls, and crevasses hidden beneath a thin layer of snow. A climber at 8,000 meters is simultaneously fighting their own body shutting down from the inside and a mountain striking from the outside. Rescuing someone above 8,000 meters is virtually impossible. At that altitude, a climber can carry a maximum of 25 kilograms, barely enough to haul themselves. An incapacitated person weighs 80 kilograms or more. Helicopters operate up to 6,400 meters. Above that, only people. More than 200 bodies lie on Everest right now. No one will bring them down. $30,000 to $45,000. This is the range where large Nepalese operators work. 7 summit treks, summit climb, 8K expeditions. These are not underground outfits. 7 Summit Treks is one of the largest operators on Everest, handling dozens of clients every season. Summit Climb is led by Dan Mazur, a veteran expedition leader on Everest. There is a system here, logistics, experience, but there is also a ceiling, and it depends heavily on the specific package. In the budget tier, the level of support varies. In some cases, 5 oxygen bottles and a 1-to-1 Sherpa are included in the base price. In others, personal support on rotations, extra oxygen, expanded medical coverage, and an evacuation plan are paid for separately. The difference between the cheapest and the most expensive package within a single operator can be $10,000 to $15,000, and it is precisely in that gap where the safety margin hides. A general pattern noted by analysts: the lower the price, the more often critical elements of safety and support depend on the specific package and are billed separately. This can include the volume of oxygen, the level of personal accompaniment, evacuation terms, and other elements of expedition reserve. Each additional oxygen bottle typically costs around $500 to $650. According to Alan Arnett, low expedition costs often attract less prepared clients, and the largest operators consistently show a disproportionately high death rate per client. This is not an indictment of any specific company, but a trend he has tracked across several seasons. That said, it would be a mistake to think that only novices enter the budget tier. Often it is the opposite. Strong, experienced climbers come here, deliberately cutting support, not to save money, for style, without oxygen, without a personal Sherpa. Solo, they know the mountains better than many who pay twice as much. They believe that skill and willpower compensate for the absence of a safety net. And there is a tragic example of exactly that. 2 people from this segment. A Hungarian teacher who summited K2 solo without oxygen in 15 hours, and a Kenyan banker who became the first African on an 8,000er without oxygen, and was ready to go bankrupt for the next summit. Szilard Suhajda was born in 1982 in Békés Saba in southeastern Hungary. An English teacher by training, in 2010 he moved to Brighton and took a job that funded not a career but mountains. Every free hour went to overtime shifts, and every dollar earned above rent went to gear from eBay and flights to the Himalayas. In 2007 he climbed Mont Blanc. In 2008 he survived an avalanche in the Austrian Alps. In 2014 he summited Broad Peak without oxygen, his first 8,000er. He attempted K2 twice and turned back both times. In 2017, he tried Everest for the first time, turning around at 7,900 meters after losing 15 kilograms during the expedition. But in 2019, he returned to K2 and made it, solo, without oxygen, 15 hours from Camp 4 to the summit, the first Hungarian in history. In 2022, Lotsa, also without oxygen, the third Hungarian on that peak. In the spring of 2023, Suhajda flew to Everest. 7 summit treks provided only base camp logistics, no full support package, no oxygen, no personal Sherpa. That format costs significantly less than a standard expedition, roughly $25,000 to $35,000. On the mountain, he climbed alone, the way he always did. On May 24th, at 7:30 in the morning, climber Ben Ferrer photographed him at the balcony at 8,400 meters. Ferrer would later say that Suhajda looked exhausted. At 1:30 in the afternoon, Canadian filmmaker Elias Saikali passed him above the balcony. He tried to speak. Suhajda did not respond. He just kept going up, slowly but stubbornly. Saikali became the last person to see him alive and moving. The satellite tracker gave its final signal from 8,795 meters, the base of the Hillary Step, 50 meters from the summit. On the morning of May 25th, Sherpas from the Imagine Nepal team, descending from the summit, spotted Suhajda near the Hillary Step. He showed signs of life, but his face and hands were frostbitten, and his behavior pointed to high-altitude cerebral edema. The Sherpas were guiding their own client. They could not help. The rescue operation was extraordinary. Italian pilot Simone Moro flew 3 Sherpas by helicopter, including Gelje Sherpa, one of the first to summit K2 in winter, from Kathmandu to Camp 2. They climbed to 8,750 meters in 7 hours instead of the usual 20. They searched both the Nepalese and Tibetan sides, climbed up and down multiple times. Nothing. On May 28th, an aerial reconnaissance also came up empty. The search was called off. The body of Szilard Suhajda has never been found. His wife asked that if it ever is, leave him on the mountain. Anyone who saw Kirui train had no doubt. This man was built for mountains. Born in 1984 in Kapsabet, in Kenya's Nandi County, he came to climbing late, after 30, during a corporate retreat at the foot of Kilimanjaro. The mountain on the horizon would not let go. Within months, he was standing on the summit of Mount Kenya, then again and again. More than 20 ascents with speed records on several routes. Kilimanjaro, 15 hours up and down. Ultramarathons on 4 continents, including the 200-kilometer Tour des Géants in the Italian Alps, about which he wrote a book. All this time, Kirui worked as a banker, senior relationships manager in the mortgage division of Kenya Commercial Bank. Meetings, credit lines, a tie, and on weekends, glaciers, rock faces, and high-altitude camps. In September 2023, he climbed Manizlu, 8,163 meters, without oxygen and without Sherpa support. The first African on an 8,000er without oxygen. Everest was the next step. In the spring of 2024, Kirui flew to Everest. The expedition budget was around $47,000, 7 summit treks. The plan was to climb without oxygen. With him was a Sherpa named Nawang, 44 years old, who carried 1 emergency bottle, in case Kirui, as he himself wrote, loses consciousness or goes insane. On May 17th, before the summit push, Kirui published his final Instagram post. He described the risks of climbing without oxygen, and added, "The sum of zeros needed for all of this to happen means I will declare bankruptcy as soon as I return to Kenya." On May 22nd, he left Camp 4. Communication was lost somewhere on the approach to the summit. The last thing Nawang transmitted by radio from roughly 8,810 meters, Bishop Rock, sounded alarming. Kirui refused to turn back. His behavior was erratic. He was using the emergency oxygen. Nawang could not stop him. The 7 Summit Treks rescue team found Kirui's body between the summit and the Hillary Step, at approximately 8,830 meters, 48 meters from the top of the world. Nawang Sherpa, the man who tried to save him, disappeared. He was never found. Kirui's family decided to leave the body on the mountain. In their statement they wrote, "He is resting in his happy place." Between 35,000, where every bottle counts, and 200,000, where oxygen is unlimited, there exists a segment where a significant portion of commercial clients make their ascent, $45,000 to $75,000. This is not luxury. This is the standard that an ordinary climber saves up for over years, sometimes selling a car or taking out a loan. Here you find operators with decades of experience. International Mountain Guides has been around since 1986 and has guided more than 600 people to the summit of Everest. Climbing the 7 summits offers a large geodesic dome in base camp with a cafe, a barista, and Wi-Fi. Adventure Consultants, the company tied to the name Rob Hall, who died on Everest in 1996, is running its 30th expedition to the mountain in 2026. For this money, a client typically gets what the budget tier often lacks: more oxygen with a reserve, denser Sherpa coverage along the entire route, access to doctors at base camp, professional weather forecasts calculated with greater precision and detail than basic bulletins, reliable radio communication, and more comfortable living, heated tents, hot food, regular resupplies of fresh provisions. Mid-range clients are usually not beginners. Aconcagua, Denali, sometimes Manaslu. They understand what altitude is, they know their limits, and they came not for adventure, but for the summit. On paper, the mid-range tier covers nearly every known risk. The Sherpa is there, the oxygen is there, the doctor is available, the forecast is solid. But one thing is not on paper: a guarantee that in a single narrow weather window, hundreds of people will not set out on the road at the same time, that the line at the Hillary Step will not stretch to 2 hours. 2 hours in the death zone, where oxygen runs out, strength fades, and time disappears. The mid-range tier is built for normal conditions, but on Everest, normal conditions are the exception, not the rule. In the spring of 2019, that is exactly what happened. A record 381 to 382 permits on the Nepalese side, nearly 900 successful summits that season, and one variable no one could control: Cyclone Fani. The strongest pre-monsoon cyclone in the Bay of Bengal since 1991 struck the coast of India on May 3rd. Everest was 2,300 kilometers away, but the moist air reached the Himalayas, burying the upper camps in snow and wrecking the schedule for fixing ropes. In 2018, climbers had 11 days of good weather. In 2019, the window shrank to roughly 5. Everyone who wanted the summit went in the same window. On May 22nd, more than 200 people reached the summit, one of the most crowded days in the mountain's history. Between the south summit and the top, a line of 200 to 320 people stretched along the ridge. One route, one rope, drops on both sides. Wait time at the Hillary Step: about 2 hours. 2 hours in the death zone, where oxygen runs out, strength fades, and time disappears. The photograph of that line was taken by Nirmal Purya, who that day summited Everest in the morning, descended, and after lunch climbed Lhasa as well. The image, a dense chain of people in bright gear on a narrow ridge, went around the world within 24 hours. 11 people died that season. The bottleneck was a significant factor in at least several of those deaths. Among them was Donald Lynn Cash, 55 years old, from Sandy, Utah, a former vice president of BMC Software who quit his job in January 2019 to chase the dream of the 7 summits. On previous expeditions, he had already lost fingertips to frostbite. It did not stop him. Pioneer Adventure, a Nepalese commercial operator, 2 Sherpas, oxygen. On May 22nd, a 12-hour summit push. The summit. A call to his family on a satellite phone. The last words his son heard: "I feel blessed, standing on a mountain I've been reading about for 40 years. On the descent, Cash lost consciousness. The Sherpas performed resuscitation and swapped his bottle. He briefly came to, but could not stand. He needed to be dragged down, through the Hillary Step, where the line was still there. The bottleneck prevented a rapid descent. Cash died at approximately 8,770 meters. His body remained on the mountain. He had signed a waiver in advance. 3 days later, on May 25th, Robin Haynes Fisher set out on the same route. 44 years old, a Briton from Birmingham. A Cisco engineer, triathlete, marathon runner, author, vegetarian, a man who as a child dreamed of becoming an astronaut. His operator was Everest Pariwar, also a Nepalese commercial company. His Sherpa was Jangbu, one of the most experienced guides on the mountain. Fisher brought more oxygen than the standard amount. He knew that oxygen is time, and time on Everest is life. On May 16th, Fisher published a long Instagram post. He described the deaths of an Indian and an Irish climber. He mentioned that around 700 people were planning to push for the summit starting the 21st, and he explained why he was delaying his own attempt to the 25th. With a single route to the summit, delays caused by overcrowding could prove fatal. I am hopeful that the 25th will see fewer climbers, unless, of course, everyone else is playing the same waiting game. On May 25th, Fisher and Jangbu reached the summit at 8:30 in the morning. On the descent, roughly 150 meters below the summit, Fisher lost consciousness. Jangbu swapped his bottle and tried to give him water. No response. By 9:15, Robin Haynes Fisher was dead. His partner, Kristen Carriere, learned of his death from an article online before she received an official notification. Fisher's Instagram post became one of the most cited documents in the history of the Everest debate. According to Alan Arnett, most people pay between $40,000 and $80,000 for Everest. Cash and Fisher were not in the ultra-budget range and did not buy the luxury package. They paid the amount that most people on the mountain pay. One went into the crowd on the 22nd and died in line. The other waited 3 days to avoid it and died anyway. The government of Nepal called claims linking overcrowding to deaths unfounded. After the stories of Cash and Fisher, a logical question arises. What if you pay more? Not $50,000, but $80,000, $130,000, $200,000. Is there a price tag after which Everest becomes safe? The market answers differently. You can buy the maximum support, but you cannot buy safety. $80,000 to $200,000. Madison Mountaineering, $79,500. Garrett Madison, a veteran Everest summiteer who has personally guided more than 80 clients to the top. CTSS Private, around $130,000. A personal Western guide plus a personal Sherpa. A geodesic dome in base camp with a bed and a barista. At the very top of the scale, Furtenbach Adventures from Austria, around $200,000, unlimited oxygen, hypoxic pre-acclimatization at home, an expedition in 3 weeks instead of 2 months, real-time health monitoring, one of the best-known operators working this model. Premium is the maximum support money can buy on Everest. More oxygen, more accompaniment, stronger logistics, stricter turnaround decisions. But maximum support and safety are not the same thing. In 2023, 2 clients of strong teams died on Everest. Both were doctors. One of them, Jonathan Sugarman, died at Camp 2 before the death zone even began. The other, Peter Swart, perished on the descent below Camp 4 despite the help of an experienced Madison Mountaineering team. Jonathan Sugarman had built a career where the word achievement was the norm. Harvard, a medical degree from the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, a master's in public health from the University of Washington. For nearly 20 years, he ran Qualis Health, a major nonprofit in Seattle focused on the quality of medical care. Clinical professor, author of dozens of scientific publications. A man who spent his entire life assessing medical risk professionally. He came to climbing after 50. A college friend invited him to Kilimanjaro. Then Aconcagua, Denali, peaks in Ecuador. In 2016, on Cho Oyu, he developed high-altitude pulmonary edema. The expedition had to be cut short. He knew he was predisposed to altitude illness. He knew, and came back anyway. In the spring of 2023, Sugarman set out for Everest with IMG, one of the most respected Western operators. This was not the budget tier, but a full-scale commercial expedition with a personal Nepalese guide, round-the-clock radio communication, and robust logistics. A company that has guided more than 600 people to the summit of Everest. On May 1st, the team was at Camp 2, around 6,400 meters, a scheduled rest day before heading to Camp 3. Not the death zone, not even the upper part of the mountain. That day, Sugarman felt unwell and died. No fall, no avalanche, no storm. Not on the route, not near the summit. In a tent, on a rest day. IMG released a brief statement. This was not a route accident and was not related to trail conditions. The exact cause of death was never officially disclosed. 69 years old, pulmonary edema in his medical history. A body that had already failed at altitude once before. Sugarman did not cut corners, did not climb without oxygen, did not get caught in a crowd. He was in the commercial range where Everest expeditions typically cost roughly $50,000 to $100,000. But at 6,400 meters, his body decided otherwise. And at that moment, the difference between an expensive expedition and the most expensive expedition all but vanishes. Peter Swart had dreamed of Everest since he was 9 years old. In the 4th grade, he gave a school presentation about the mountain and never stopped thinking about it. He grew up in South Africa, graduated from medical school, became an anesthesiologist. He moved to Canada, spent 19 years working at Vancouver General Hospital, taught at the University of British Columbia. He was married to Saretha for 26 years and raised 2 children. He built his mountain resume gradually. Rainier, Denali, Aconcagua. His wife described Everest as the next logical step. For the expedition, Swart chose Madison Mountaineering, one of the most expensive and respected operators on the mountain, around $79,500. Garrett Madison personally led the expedition. On May 24, 2023, the Madison team had one of the strongest days of the season. 8 clients, 4 Western guides, and 15 Sherpas reached the summit in exceptional conditions. Warm, windless, the route nearly empty. Madison would later write that these were the best conditions in his entire career on the mountain. But Peter Swart did not make it to the summit. He turned around at the South Col. He was not feeling well. The decision to turn around on the approach to the summit is one of the hardest in mountaineering. Swart made it. It was the right decision. But the mountain did not care. The next day, descending below Camp 4, his condition deteriorated rapidly. Guides Terry Sylvester and Scott Webster spent the entire day bringing him down. At 1 in the afternoon, Garrett Madison and Cacho Beza joined them, having turned back from Lhotse. 4 Western guides plus Sherpas. The team tried to get him to an altitude where helicopter evacuation might become possible. They did not make it in time. Swart died on the descent from a rapidly developing respiratory crisis that the team attributed to lung damage. His son organized a fundraiser for Everest Sherpas and told journalists what his father had repeated for years. Sherpas are the real heroes of Everest. The best operator, 4 Western guides, one of the strongest teams on the mountain, and still, the illness was faster than the descent. 18 deaths in 2023, bodies that cannot be retrieved. Lines in the death zone that make global headlines year after year. After every record season, the same question is asked. Why does Nepal do nothing? It does. On paper. Starting September 2025, permits went up to $15,000. Mandatory guides, GPS trackers, a ban on solo climbing, expanded insurance. It sounds tough, but the solo ban has been announced 4 times in 8 years and never enforced. In 2024, 2 Mongolian climbers set out without guides and without Sherpa support. They were offered accompaniment for free. They refused. Both died. The most ambitious measure, a requirement of experience on a Nepalese 7,000er, passed the upper chamber of Parliament in February 2026, but never became law. The reason is simple. Everest is an industry that brings Nepal hundreds of millions of dollars a year. Every restriction means fewer clients, fewer permits, less money. As Alan Arnett notes, Nepal has a long-standing problem. Bold rules are often weakly enforced. 5 dead in 2025, 18 in 2023. The difference between those numbers is not in regulations on paper. It is in the width of the weather window, the number of helicopter evacuations, and the decision of each individual person standing at 8,000 meters who refuses to turn around. By the end of the 2025 season, a total of 339 people had died on Everest throughout the mountain's climbing history. Of those, 208 were expedition members, and another 130 were hired staff, Sherpas, high-altitude workers, and other expedition personnel. The first recorded deaths on the mountain date back to 1922, when an avalanche killed 7 porters on a British expedition. Since then, nearly every season has added new names. But the overall picture does not lead to the simple conclusion that Everest is becoming deadlier. Over the long term, the risk has actually decreased. In the 20th century, the mortality rate was noticeably higher, and since 1990, it has hovered around roughly 1%, though exact figures depend on the methodology. Not because the mountain has gone soft, because almost everything around it has changed. Forecasts, communications, oxygen logistics, fixed ropes, medicine, and the scale of Sherpa support, where once a single high-altitude worker might serve several clients. Today on the south side, the ratio is increasingly 1-to-1 and even 2-to-1. Oxygen remains the starkest divider of risk. A University of Washington study published in JAMA found that among those who had already reached the summit, the likelihood of dying on the descent without oxygen was roughly 3 times higher than with it, 8.3% versus 3%. And even now, ascents without oxygen remain rare. Over the entire history, there have been 232 such summiteers, or about 1.5% of the total. Recent seasons illustrate this as well. In 2023, Nepal issued 478 permits. 656 summits were recorded and 18 deaths. In 2024, 421 permits and 8 deaths. In 2025, 468 permits, 5 deaths, and approximately 786 to 800 summits depending on the counting method. These numbers do not follow a straight line. They fluctuate with the weather, the length of the summit window, and the quality of logistics at the upper camps. There is another pattern. According to Alan Arnett's analysis, all 8 fatalities in 2024 were clients of Nepalese operators, and in 2023, 15 of the 18 deaths fell on their clients. This does not mean that an expensive operator makes a person invulnerable, but it does mean that expedition resources matter. How much oxygen is allocated, how many Sherpas work per client, how quickly the decision to turn around is made, and how firmly a guide can stop a person before it is too late. A cheap Everest strips away the margin of safety. Every bottle cut, every absent Sherpa, every dollar saved. It is the gap between life and death growing just a little narrower. One mistake, one frozen regulator, one wrong decision at an altitude where the brain can no longer make decisions. And there is no buffer. The mid-range tier does not save you from the system. You can pay $50,000 to $60,000, have a Sherpa, oxygen, a forecast, and end up in line at the Hillary Step, where 300 people stand on a single rope, and every minute of waiting burns through the oxygen that was supposed to keep you alive on the descent. The system works when there are 50 people on the route. When there are 300, the system becomes part of the problem. The premium tier does not save you from physiology. 4 guides, a helicopter at Camp 2, the best weather in a decade, and lungs filling with fluid faster than legs can carry you down. A heart that stops in a tent on a rest day, at an altitude that is not even considered dangerous. No check changes how the body reacts to altitude. No operator controls the moment when organs decide to quit. On Everest, money does not buy safety. It buys more time before the mountain starts taking what is hers.